Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep on something. We all need calf muscles.
Yeah, essential for pretty much everything, right? Walking, running, jumping.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, calf muscle tears are pretty common. So we're going to be using a great article from zenfitpulse.com. It's called Calf Muscle Tear, Causes, Symptoms, and the Ultimate Recovery Guide.
Oh, zenjitpulse.com is fantastic. Great resource for this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So today we're going to cover a lot. We're going to figure out what a calf muscle tear is, how to recognize the symptoms, and how to treat one if it happens.
And most importantly, how to prevent them in the first place.
Right, prevention is key. All right, let's jump in. Can you give us like a quick anatomy lesson? What actually makes up the calf muscle?
So a lot of people think it's just one big muscle, but it's actually a group.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The two main players are the gastrocnemius, that's the one you see when you flick, and the soleus, which is deeper down.
Ah, okay. So when we talk about a calf muscle tear, we're talking about damage to one or both of these muscles.
Exactly. Basically, the muscle fibers get overstretched or contract too hard and, well, they tear.
Ouch. And I know the article mentions different grades of tears. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. Tears are graded on a scale of 1 to 3, with grade 1 being like a tiny tear and grade 3 being a complete rupture, like the whole thing snaps.
Wow, okay. And does the amount of pain match how bad the tear is? Like, is a grade 3 tear the most painful?
Well, that's the thing, not necessarily.
Huh, I'm sure.
Someone with a grade 2 tear might have more pain than someone with a grade 3. It's kind of weird. That's why it's so important to get it checked out by a doctor. They can diagnose it properly.
Makes sense. Now, I have to admit, I always thought calf muscle tears were just a sports injury.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. While it's definitely common in athletes, especially in sports that involve a lot of sprinting and jumping, like tennis or basketball.
Right, lots of quick movements.
Yeah, exactly. But there are a bunch of other things that can cause tears too.
Like what?
Well, the article mentions overuse and fatigue as major factors. Doing the same movements over and over again, like running, cycling, even dancing.
Right, it all adds up.
Yeah, it puts a lot of stress on those calf muscles, especially if you're not giving them enough time to recover.
So basically, even everyday activities can lead to a tear if we're not careful.
Exactly. And another thing that people often underestimate is the importance of a proper warm-up.
Oh yeah, warm-up is crucial, right?
Absolutely. Cold muscles are way more prone to tearing.
It's like stretching a cool rubber band, right? So
Yeah.
more likely to snap.
Exactly. A good warm-up gets those muscle fibers ready for action, makes them more flexible and less likely to tear.
So warming up is like telling your muscles, hey, get ready, we're about to do some work.
Uh-huh, exactly. And speaking of things that people don't always think about, good footwear is super important too.
Oh yeah, shoes matter a lot, don't they?
Big time. Worn out shoes, shoes that don't fit well, or shoes that aren't right for the activity can all put extra strain on your calves.
That makes sense. It's amazing how all these things can contribute to a calf muscle tear. It really shows how important it is to understand our bodies and how to prevent injuries. And if you want to dive deeper into this topic and learn more about how to take care of your body, be sure to visit zenfitpulse.com.
They have tons of great articles on health and wellness, all backed by science.
Absolutely. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more fascinating deep dives in all sorts of topics.
We're always exploring new and interesting subjects.
All right, so we've covered what a calf muscle tear is
Yeah.
and some of the things that can cause it. Now, let's talk about the symptoms. What should people be on the lookout for?
Well, the most obvious one is pain.
Yeah,
You'll probably feel a sharp, sudden pain, maybe even a popping or snapping sensation, like right when it happens.
oof, that sounds pretty intense. What else?
Well, along with the pain, you're likely to see some swelling and bruising around the area.
Makes sense. Your body's trying to heal itself, right?
Exactly. And since we use our calf muscles for pretty much everything,
Right, walking, standing.
you might have trouble doing those things, like even just putting weight on that leg.
And I remember the article also mentioned stiffness and weakness in the calf.
Yeah, for sure. And now in some cases, like if the muscle completely ruptures, which is a grade 3 tear,
Oh, wow.
you might actually see a deformity, like a bulge or dent in your calf. That's a sign you need to get to a doctor ASAP.
Yeah, that sounds pretty serious. So let's say you think you might have a calf muscle tear. How do you get a diagnosis?
Well, as we talked about before, the level of pain isn't always a reliable indicator.
Right, right.
So you really need to see a healthcare professional to get a proper diagnosis.
The article mentioned that doctors use a few different methods to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, they'll usually start with a physical exam. They'll feel around your calf, check for tenderness, swelling, or any weird deformities.
Hands-on approach?
Yeah. And they might also ask you to do some functional tests, like standing on your toes, to see how strong the muscle is and if it's stable.
Okay, makes sense.
Now, if they suspect a more serious tear, they might want to get a clearer picture of what's going on inside.
So that's where imaging comes in, right?
Exactly. Something like an ultrasound or an MRI can show them the muscle in detail and confirm how bad the tear is, especially if it's a severe one.
So those are pretty standard for muscle injuries.
Yeah. Now, x-rays aren't used to diagnose the muscle tear itself, but they can rule out any broken bones, which is important.
Right, got to cover all the bases.
Yeah.
So let's say you've been diagnosed with a calf muscle tear. What happens next? What are the treatment options?
So the first thing you do, like right after the injury, is the RICE method.
RICE.
It stands for rest, ice, compression, and elevation. It's like the go-to for the first 48 hours.
Ah, okay, to help with inflammation and pain. The article goes into detail about each part of RICE, but are there any, pro tips you can share?
Oh, sure. For icing, frozen peas wrapped in a towel work great. They kind of mold to your calf better than a regular ice pack. And when you're elevating your leg, make sure it's actually above your heart. You might need to prop it up with some pillows.
Good to know. Those are really helpful tips. Now, what about pain management? What do people usually do for the pain?
Over-the-counter pain relievers like ibuprofen or acetaminophen usually do the trick for mild to moderate pain.
Yeah, those are the usual suspects.
But if the pain is really bad or doesn't respond to those, your doctor might give you something stronger.
Okay, so there are options. So once the initial swelling goes down, I guess the focus shifts to getting that calf muscle back in shape.
Exactly. Physical therapy is super important for recovery, especially for those more serious tears.
The article talked about using stretching and strengthening exercises to regain flexibility and strength.
Yeah, and your therapist will tailor those exercises to you based on how bad the tear is and your specific needs.
Makes sense.
For athletes, they'll often include sport-specific exercises to help them get back to their game safely.
So it's a pretty personalized process.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about working with a qualified physical therapist to create a plan that's right for you. Speaking of getting back to things, all this talk about treatment and rehab makes me even more curious about prevention. What can we do to avoid these tears in the first place?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, a good warm-up before any physical activity is crucial, especially if you're running, jumping, or doing anything with quick changes in direction.
So like leg swings, lunges, high knees, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Dynamic stretches like those are great for warming up those calf muscles. And if you're interested in learning more about warm-up exercises or other ways to prevent calf muscle tears, head over to zenfitpulse.com.
They have a wealth of information on all sorts of health and fitness topics.
And don't forget to subscribe to the Deep Dive for more fascinating deep dives like this one. We're always exploring something new.
All right, so warm-up is key. What else can we do?
Well, on top of warming up, adding regular strength training and stretching to your routine can make a big difference.
So exercises like toe raises and calf raises to build strength.
Yep. And stretches that target the calf muscles to improve flexibility.
Got it. And another thing the article mentioned is that if you're increasing your activity level, like if you start running more or hiking more, you got to do it gradually.
Oh, absolutely. Sudden jumps in intensity or duration can overload those calf muscles and make them more susceptible to injury.
They talked about the 10% rule.
Yeah, increase your activity by no more than 10% each week. That's a good guideline.
Makes sense. And of course, we can't forget about good footwear, right?
Absolutely essential. Supportive, well-fitting shoes that are right for the activity you're doing. That's key for protecting your calves.
And speaking of protection, let's not forget about rest and recovery.
Oh, yeah, huge. You got to listen to your body. Don't push through fatigue or soreness. Rest days are just as important as workout days.
It's all about balance, right?
Exactly. Give those muscles time to recover and rebuild.
And last but not least, the article really emphasized good nutrition and hydration.
So important. Dehydration can lead to muscle cramps, which can actually increase your risk of a tear, and eating a balanced diet with plenty of protein, calcium, and magnesium.
Those are the building blocks for healthy muscles, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They give your muscles what they need to repair and grow.
It's all connected. It's amazing how taking care of your body in one area can impact so many others. This has been incredibly informative. Before we wrap up with some final thoughts, I want to remind everyone to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations into all sorts of fascinating topics.
And for more on calf muscle health and other wellness topics, head over to zenfitpulse.com. Their articles are well-researched, easy to understand, and packed with practical advice.
Okay, so we've covered a lot today. What are the key takeaways from our deep dive into calf muscle tears?
Well, we know now that these tears can be mild to severe, and they can happen for all sorts of reasons, from sudden movements to overuse to even the wrong shoes.
We talked about the telltale signs: sharp pain, swelling, trouble walking, and even seeing a deformity in serious cases. We learned about how doctors diagnose them.
And the importance of quick treatment, starting with that RICE method right away.
Right, rest, ice, compression, elevation. We talked about physical therapy being crucial for getting your strength and flexibility back.
And touched on surgery for those really bad tears and all the things that can affect how long it takes to heal, like your age and overall health.
But probably the most important thing we talked about is how to prevent these tears from happening in the first place.
Absolutely. Warming up properly, doing strength training and stretching, picking the right shoes, and giving your body the rest it needs.
Before we leave you today, though, I want to leave you with a little something to think about.
We focused a lot on the physical side of calf muscle tears, but what about the mental and emotional impact? How can we create a mindset that helps us heal and bounce back from an injury?
That's a really interesting question. So listeners, we encourage you to explore that a bit. And if you're looking for more insights on calf muscle health or other health and wellness topics, definitely check out zenfitpulse.com. Their articles are a great resource, clear, engaging, and easy to understand. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating subjects. We're always on the lookout for the next adventure, and we can't wait to share our discoveries with you. It really is fascinating how much our mental state can affect our physical healing.
Oh, for sure. The mind-body connection is powerful. Focusing on staying positive, managing stress, and getting support from others, all that can be just as important as the physical therapy itself.
So true. All right, we've covered so much about calf muscle tears today. But before we wrap up completely, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier: when to see a doctor. What are some red flags that should make us pick up the phone and schedule an appointment?
Yeah, the article pointed out a few key things to watch for. Like if the pain is super intense and it doesn't get better with rest, ice, and those over-the-counter pain relievers, that's a sign you should definitely see a doctor.
Okay, that makes sense.
Also, if you can't put any weight on your leg, ATALL, or you notice any visible swelling or a weird shape.
Right, like that deformity we talked about.
Exactly. Don't wait. Go get checked out.
What about bruising? Is that something to be concerned about?
Yeah, if the bruising is spreading beyond just your calf, or if you have other symptoms with it, like numbness or tingling, it's a good idea to get it checked out.
Yeah, better safe than sorry, right?
Absolutely. Catching things early can make a huge difference in how well you recover.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything there is to know about calf muscle tears today. From the anatomy to what causes them, the symptoms, how they're diagnosed, treatment, prevention. We really went deep.
Hopefully, our listeners are feeling a lot more knowledgeable and empowered to take care of their calf muscles now.
Yeah, knowing how to prevent these tears and what to do if you get one, that's powerful stuff. It can really help people stay active and pain-free.
For sure.
And hey, if anyone wants even more info on calf muscle tears or just wants to explore other health and wellness stuff, be sure to visit zenfitpulse.com.
Their website is awesome.
Wow.
Really good evidence-based articles and practical advice. It's great.
Couldn't agree more. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating subjects.
We're always on the hunt for the next deep dive. We love exploring new stuff.
So until next time, dear listeners, stay curious, stay informed, and take good care of those calf muscles.